Chess players use chunking. They chunk pieces the way that Barry Bonds does body movements. In the 1940s, in a series of famous studies, chess players of different ability levels were given chessboards and then they were taken away and the players had to try to recreate them. Grandmaster chess players could recreate a board after seeing it for only 3 seconds. So the scientists concluded that, well, grandmaster chess players just have innately miraculous memory. They're just gifted with great memory. But then the study was repeated starting in the 1970s, and this time the players were also given boards that had non-meaningful game arrangements. And the grandmasters were suddenly exactly with the novices. They didn't have innately miraculous memory. They had just learned a system of breaking down this chaotic information into chunks. Football quarterbacks, American football quarterbacks do the same thing. If you did an eye-tracking study of me and watched me playing quarterback, you would see me following the person I want to throw to, and then switching and following another person I might throw to. If you do an eye-tracking study of Peyton Manning, you'll see him focusing on spaces between players. They're unifying to the parts and their relationship in the whole. So he only has 2 seconds to make a decision of where to throw. He's a chess master with the football field. Elites practice more, but if you look at the trajectory over the whole lifetime of elite athletes actually practice less in their eventual sport early on than near elite athletes. This is aggregate data from a number of sports. So what's going on in that period? What's going on there is what scientists call a sampling period. The athletes who go on to become elites are engaging in play. They're not being overly coached. It's not stifling their creativity. They engage in sampling where they learn a range of skills, and they do niche finding. They test different sports to see where they fit. So the way that some people have taken this 10,000 hours idea and taken the most strict form of it is to say that, well, if only hours of accumulated practice matter, then you need to start as early as possible. Of course, in music, right? Well, not so much. Actually, if you look at studies of musicians in elite academies, those musicians who are of exceptional ability sample early on, and only in their third instrument do they start practicing more than musicians of average ability. They play around, and they find the right instrument for them. They spend time finding it. They do this sampling period before they home in, and they don't plateau. Sports scientists in Great Britain, when they were coming up in the Olympics, they said, we're going to make determinants of performance for every different type of sport. And they started with shot put. Really simple. Only 3 things determine performance in shot put: the release velocity of the shot, the height of release of the shot, and the angle of release of the shot. That's it. And so they then looked at a matchup between the 2 best people in the world to see how these played out. The guy on the left, the silver medalist, and the guy on the right, the gold medalist. And they looked at these parameters, and they saw in release height, the guy who won the silver was actually better. Okay. Well, release velocity, the guy who won the silver was also better, so he's probably a better athlete. But the guy who won the gold threw 1.5 degree higher angle and won the gold. Now, what if the guy who won the silver, instead of throwing at 31.5 degrees, had thrown 1 degree higher? That instead of throwing 70 feet 11 inches, he would have thrown 72 feet 4.5 inches and would have alchemized that silver into gold. So UK Sports saw this and they said, we can apply this to some other simple sports. They started with long jump. So there's only three determinants of performance in long jump: speed down the runway, force into the jumping board, and angle of your jump. So they hired a PhD biomechanist, of which there are precious few in the world, and gave her the title of horizontal jumps specialist. How's that for a specialized title? Her job was just to watch research-grade footage of jumpers just going like this, and to figure out what mattered and what she could change, most importantly. So first, she figured out really quickly she couldn't change their maximum sprint speed. She figured out really quickly she couldn't change their force into the board either. They already had technique at that level. But she could change their jump angle. So all she did for 2 years was work with Great Britain's best jumper just to modify his jump angle and nothing else. And come the Olympics, he didn't have one of the 10 fastest approaches into the board, not one of the 5 fastest forces into the board, jumped at the perfect angle and won the gold medal. There's a guy who is clearly not the best athlete in his event, but by finding what mattered, and more importantly, big data always find what matters, but finding what you can change, they found him that extra 0.5%. And that's what big data in sports is often overlooking. It's finding plenty of descriptors, but very little about what you can actually change. I want to leave you with a certain idea, a quote that I love from one of my favorite scientists, J.M. Tanner, who was a world-class hurdler and the world's expert in body growth and development. He said, everyone has a different genotype. Therefore, for optimal development, everyone should have a different environment. That's what we're finding, that no 2 people have the same physiology. Even if they're identical twins, you have different genes. And what exercise genetics is showing us, what skill acquisition in general is showing us, that training should be a form of self-exploration, of finding that optimal environment that is unique for only your genome. And the athletes who are able to find this are the ones who are allowed to learn by themselves early on, to sport sample, instead of being told that this is the right way to do it. They find the right niche and they engage in a self-trial and error because there's no margin for error. They can't afford not to find the best system for themselves to get that 0.5%. So the path to elite athlete status in many other skills, music, air traffic controlling, surgery, is not focusing in and accumulating hours as quickly as you can. It's sampling first, having a sampling period, then finding out what matters and what you can change. The learning like a baby period, the sampling period that people need to eventually master skills. It shows up in every single sport now, by accident. Because with good intentions, by specializing kids, by highly specializing them and coaching them like professionals, we've made sure that they can never become elite and will only plateau at near elite.